Welcome to Beyond Politics. We like to do a program in honor of Women's Equality Day each year. We did this a little bit later. We usually do it at the end of August, but schedules did not allow that. We wanted to have this esteemed panel together. First, I'm going to start by introducing the president of the League of Women Voters of Ohio Board, Iris Meltzer.
Thank you, Jen. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Ohio Board of Directors, staff, and our over 3,700 members across the state of Ohio, thank you for taking the time to attend tonight's event. On June 24th, with one swift vote of just 5 Americans, millions of other Americans lost the right to choose what is best for their health and their bodies. As we come to terms with this blatant disregard for precedent and gross governmental overreach, we as the League stand strong in our belief that part of people's right to privacy includes a person's inalienable right to choose if and when to parent. The League remains deeply rooted in our nonpartisan foundation. We never have nor will support an individual candidate. However, we have stood up for human rights for over 100 years and have no intention of stopping now. This evening, we have assembled a remarkable panel of speakers to address reproductive rights from very different and diverse points of view. Tonight's speakers will address reproductive rights not as a partisan issue, but rather as one that has critical societal and individual impacts. Thank you again for attending. Jen, back to you.
Thank you so much. I just have a couple housekeeping items. If you need closed captioning, there is a way to do that. If you see here on the screen, you can just hit that CC at the bottom for live transcript. State House Day. Usually our State House Day is in the spring. We were in the middle of a COVID surge when our State House Day was scheduled. So it's now going to be December 7th. We don't have the registration information yet, but that'll be during the day. This will be an important time because it'll be in the middle of lame duck when we very well could have a lot of bills that we care about, including bills that deal with the democracy before the legislature. So please mark your calendar. Please, 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 if you're not a member of the League of Women Voters, please join. As you heard, we have 3,700 members, actually over 3,700 members across the state in all congressional districts, all Ohio Senate districts, and all but 4 Ohio House districts. But we need you. We are stronger together. Next slide. Just a reminder of some really important dates. National Voter Registration Day, September 20th. Voter registration deadline, October 11th. Early voting starts October 12th, and Election Day is November 8th. A little bit later than usual, but that's good. Just a reminder that we have a YouTube channel, and it is full of all kinds of trainings and conversations about democracy issues, about the needs of unique sets of voters and how to serve those voters, many different issues on there. So if you look up the League of Women Voters of Ohio on YouTube, you can actually subscribe. As you see there, you would have that button and you would just click that to subscribe. Next slide, please. We are actively recruiting election protection volunteers. This is a nonpartisan effort, and it's a year-round effort that League is so honored to work with so many diverse allies. You can do many different things, from being a poll monitor out in the field, making sure you're fielding questions, social media monitors really looking to spot that mis and disinformation. Ambassador means getting information and signs across the state, so much more. We are always looking for social workers, pastors, people who have had training in wow, my brain is not working right. Training to bring down the temperature of things, to be peacekeepers, and so much more. Those of you that are longtime League volunteers, we'd love to have you actually in our call center, which is the command center. Next slide. And of course, another way that you can serve democracy is by being a poll worker. I just had the honor of talking to some elections officials across the state today about their concerns for this election. And like always, they're needing poll workers. And finally, you can give the gift of democracy by donating to lwvohio.org/donate. We need your help to be able to defend the right to the ballot for every Ohioan. Well, I am so thrilled that we have this incredible panel, and I'm so thrilled that I get to start with someone I admire so much, and that is Joan Lawrence. Joan Lawrence is wise beyond her years, and she's also very young, youthful at 91 years old. She was born in Brooklyn, New York. She moved to Columbus in 1956 when her husband Wayman was attending OSU Law School. She lived in her family historic home for decades. She joined the Metro Columbus League in 1957 and then was elected to the Big Walnut Board of Education in 68, became State League of Women Voters of Ohio president in 1975 to 1977. She was then elected to the Ohio House of Representatives, and she served from 1983 to 1999. She also was appointed by Governor Taft to be the director of the Ohio Department of Aging from 1999 to 2005. She served on the AARP Ohio Executive Council for 6 years. And redistricting, she's been working on redistricting since the 1970s. And Joan, you were a pro-choice woman lawmaker at a time when there were even fewer women lawmakers than there are today. And so you have always been a trailblazer. What brought you to care about reproductive choice? Oh, and go ahead and unmute yourself in that little button down below. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to have Sherry give you a call and walk you through that. And I'm going to go to our next guest. Okay. The next person that we are going to hear from is Dr. Alison Norris, who is an associate professor in Ohio State's College of Public Health and Medicine. She is the co-principal investigator of the Ohio Policy Evaluation Network, OPEN, an interdisciplinary research program that studies the impacts of reproductive health-related policies and laws on the health and well-being of Ohioans. She also leads a longitudinal epidemiology, oh my goodness, I can't speak today, a cohort study investigating sexual and reproductive health decision-making among rural Malawian women and men. Wow, focusing on sensitive and stigmatized subjects, Dr. Norris uses many different methods to investigate access to contraception and abortion, and all that matters in terms of public health. So I want to ask you, Dr. Norris, thank you so much. What brought you to really start looking into reproductive health and reproductive choice?
Jen, thank you so much for the question, and thanks to the League of Women Voters for inviting me to join you today. I have 3 answers to your question: ethical, professional, and personal. From an ethical standpoint, I strongly believe in the importance of treating all people with respect, that they, like me, should be able to have a joyful life and to be safe in their body, which is a way of saying that people should have freedom. Really, it's such a fundamentally human desire, and I want that freedom for all people, including people who can become pregnant. As a professional, as an expert in public health, I understand how important it is for people to have access to reproductive health care. I started my research career in East Africa, and there, like here, when we have the policies and programs in place so that people can have children when they want to and not have children when they don't want to, individuals and families and communities are better off in every imaginable way. And finally, personally, I've been pregnant and have given birth myself. I really want laws and rights in Ohio, across the country, across the world, that honor the intense and life-altering undertaking that it is to deliver a baby. Pregnancy and birth should be a choice. No one should have to deliver a baby when they don't want to. And abortion is much safer than birth. People giving birth are 14 times more likely to die than people having an abortion. And birth should never be forced on anybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you for that. And you are our medical professional here, our expert. So could you help us understand how, from a personal perspective, abortion is healthcare? And then after that, explain the public health. So the individual patient as well as the communal public health that happens when we have choice.
That's a great way of thinking about that question. I would say from the medical standpoint, the sort of individual patient standpoint, every person who needs or wants to terminate a pregnancy needs an abortion. The conversation sometimes around medicine and healthcare becomes about physical risk, but really what is important in the lived experience of every individual goes way beyond their physical risk of being pregnant and extends into the social risks of being pregnant and then the physical and social consequences of bearing a child. The life circumstances, so then to pull back a little bit from evidence that we have from public health, the life circumstances of people who are denied an abortion have been shown to be worse in comparison to people who obtained an abortion when they wanted it in many ways. When a woman is denied an abortion, they and their families experience burdens for years afterward. They're more likely to live in poverty. Their existing children are less likely to meet developmental milestones. They're less likely to have or achieve their life goals. They're more likely to still live with an abusive partner. Economic hardship and insecurity really can last for a long, long time, for years. From an equity standpoint, which is something, of course, very important in public health, people who have experienced disadvantage are more likely to need an abortion. And people often mention lack of money as a reason that they don't want to stay pregnant. So it really becomes a catch-22 when the very people who need and want to terminate a pregnancy are unable to do so and will then be more likely to stay in poverty afterward. And then to pull it back even one step more, I'll just remind people that people from all walks of life, every life stage, every wealth status, and every geography sometimes realize that they have a pregnancy that they can't continue with. So from a public health perspective, from a medical perspective, from a freedom perspective, people need access to abortion, and we need to live in a place where the laws and policies support that access.
Thank you so much. I think that is really wise. I think about that sometimes. I was a very young single mom and I'm still digging myself out of debt and she's 24, right? So Joan, let's try this again. Can we? Yes, there we go. So glad to have you, Joan, with us. Can you talk about what brought you to really care and work for reproductive rights for women?
Yeah, well, it wasn't a question that I ever gave much thought to until you asked it. Because it was a very natural thing for me. My mother, who was a nurse too, worked with Margaret Sanger at her first women's clinic. So all my life, birth control, planning, it was always part of my life. I would never have considered not supporting women's reproductive health. But what really got me into the pro-choice action was the basic question about the role of government in private matters. As a Republican, I believe, and government should only do those things that people can't do for themselves. Well, they certainly can decide reproductive health issues without the help of government. So no, they just shouldn't. It's such an unrepublican position that I can't believe my party has gone hook, line, and sinker for the positions they have. But anyway, perhaps even more important in my mind is my conclusion that most legislators are adopting abortion-related decisions based on their religious convictions. We all accept that freedom of religion means we can believe as we wish without any government interference or control. But what we cannot do as legislators is pass laws based on our religious convictions, seeking to impose those beliefs on everybody in the population. That's what I see happening, and that's what horrifies me.
Thank you for that. And maybe you could just dig in a little bit more. How has the conversation around abortion and contraception changed over the years?
Well, I'm not exactly sure how it happened, except somehow those of us on the pro-choice side, I mean, I remember deciding back at the end of the 90s, it occurred to me, we're losing this battle. We're not winning it. We're losing more fights than we're winning. And I don't know why, but at that point I thought maybe it'd be worth trying to pass a bill that could pass, something like setting a limit of 24 weeks with the usual exceptions. But I couldn't get anyone interested in doing that. I thought passing a bill like more radical things that were going on. So I don't know exactly how it changed, but it did change. And here we are. Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad you're here. I think those were your words here, I think, were music to all of our ears. But we're going to go to Dr. Suparna Bhaskaran next, and then we will have question and answer. And I'm sure we'll have some for you, Joan. So glad you're here. So Dr. Bhaskaran, actually, we work out together. Sometimes we go to the same gym. She's a non-resident fellow at the Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy at the New School. If you saw her before at a league event, it was when she was a professor at Ohio State University, talking to us about pink lining, I think at that time. She is an expert, really bringing a diverse set of practices together, looking at whether it's wealth stripping practices, looking at the relationship between public health and wealth in post-industrial cities and communities. She's taught at Antioch, Ohio Wesleyan, Agnes Scott College, and of course, the Ohio State University, where she has taught courses on U.S. immigration and migration, health and inequality, gender and democracy, race and public policy. She is one of the founding members of OPAL, building AAPI progressive feminist leadership. OPAL is a grassroots, multi-ethnic, multi-generational community organization dedicated to building a vibrant, intersectional feminist community with the purpose of building power and progressive leadership in Ohio. I'm a big fan of OPAL that has regional hubs in Columbus, Cincinnati, and Cleveland. I'm so glad you're with us. First, the personal question, and then we'll get to the academic question. Suparna, what brings you to this issue of reproductive choice?
Thank you, Jen, for the invitation, and thank you to the League also for the invitation. I would say several reasons. Definitely begins with personal, but it's more than personal and personal choice. Having autonomy over one's body is deeply linked to having autonomy over your life. Whether it's the work you end up doing, or the school, if you want to be in school or go to college, or any other aspirations. So I see the connection between autonomy and over one's body, and autonomy over one's livelihood as well. Another reason is also justice. Many feminists of color, women of color, have also framed reproductive rights, also in terms of reproductive justice, which can include several other umbrella areas, such as under the umbrella of sexual rights, comprehensive and quality sex education, access to contraception, but also brings in the various histories of structural sexism and racism. So for instance, going back to autonomy over one's body, that goes back to one's body being seen as property under this nation's history of sexism and racism. And so to bring in an analysis of slavery as well as genocide is extremely important to understanding what reproductive rights mean to many women of color, low-resourced individuals and women.
Thank you so much. And I think it's really important as we think about public policy that we think about the broad impacts, the personal impact, as well as we've talked a little bit about the community public health impact. And let's talk about it from an economic perspective. What does taking away choice, taking away women's right to choose or contraception, what's the economic impact of that?
Okay. Often abortion rights are sometimes framed as like cultural wars. And then another thing that happens is cultural wars, however that is understood, is pitted in this false way with bread and butter issues. And in my view, abortion rights, abortion freedoms is very much a bread and butter issue. And it's about economic security. It's about economic well-being. And bread and butter issues are also about values, about priorities, who gets to be prioritized, whose bodies, whose livelihoods get prioritized. And so one of the things that I feel that would be important to understand is that abortion rights are economic, social, and political rights. And for instance, women in the US today comprise almost half of the formal labor force, versus in the 1950s, it was they were just 1/3 of the formal labor force. Today, women are the backbone to maintaining household incomes and are co-breadwinners, much more so different than the 1950s. And I'd say very specifically say formal labor force as well. So these shifts have occurred since the 1970s until today. The denial of abortion rights will deeply and disproportionately impact women and individuals that are low-resourced, who are Black and Brown and Indigenous women. And in many ways, it is showcasing this kind of history or the histories of injustice. And it cuts across multiple generations, and it also cuts across one's lifespan. So one of the things that would be important to note in terms of thinking about one's economic well-being and security is that if one was denied access to abortion rights, that has implications for, will you complete school? Will you be able to finish college? And if that's not possible, what does that mean in terms of your participation in the formal labor force, right? Will you have to leave your job? Will you have to go part-time? If you go part-time, what does that mean in terms of what kind of benefits you could have? Will you have parental paid leaves? Will you have access to health coverage? And so these are all bread and butter issues. The other thing to also note is that low-resourced women and women of color are occupationally segregated into work that is generally low-paying and have low or no benefits. So that has implications in terms of whether you're covered, if you have healthcare coverage, if you have any retirement coverage, if you have any paid leave, if you have any parental leaves. and so on and so forth. The other kind of economic dimensions and material dimensions to think about is what are the costs of maternity care? What are the costs? What are postpartum costs? What are the childcare costs? And there's no universal childcare policy in the U.S. And what are the costs of raising a child, which many would say it would take over 1/3 of the income of a low-income family. Another thing to note is Medicaid expansion is also not complete in many states, and that further deepens the inequities and economic stress on women, on low-resourced women. There's also studies that's been done that's indicated that not having access to abortion rights has also generated financial distress, such as going deeper into debt. It has increased bankruptcies, evictions, and tax liens. It has also resulted in a lot of women and individuals getting subprime credit scores. And so these are some of the economic implications of not having access to reproductive rights.
Thank you so much. I think it's really important that we think about it. Last, but definitely not least, is Dr. Eric Brown. You and I have something in common, which is that I have a whole bunch of family from the Sandusky area. Eric was born in Omaha, Nebraska, and graduated from Sandusky High School in Sandusky, Ohio, which means he probably likes roller coasters. He is a 1978 graduate of Earlham College, where he majored in biology. In 1987, he graduated from Phillips Graduate Seminary, now in Tulsa, Oklahoma, earning a Master's of Divinity. He was ordained in 1987 by the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. And he earned his doctorate of ministry from Bright Divinity School in Fort Worth, Texas. So you've been a pastor many different places, including Jarvis Christian College, the only historic Black college affiliated with the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, in Hawkins, Texas. And you now serve as the pastor of Woodland Christian Church in Columbus. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I think it's so exciting to have a gentleman on the panel, as well as the fact that you're a pastor. So would you please tell us what brings you to this work of caring about reproductive justice?
Thank you, and it's good to be with you all. When I was 14, my mama became pregnant with twins. And in the 4th month of her pregnancy, she developed some complications, and the doctor had her stay in bed until her pregnancies came to term. Doctor advised her that she could only go to the bathroom and to the kitchen to eat. And when my dad was at home, he wouldn't even let her go to the kitchen. He would bring her food to her so that she could stay in bed. Then I was able to, when I got my wife pregnant, I was able to be in the delivery room for both of their births, and I saw what women go through to bring a baby into the world. And so the experiences with my mother and the experiences with the mother of my children are what, and plus what I know scientifically, are what have me such an advocate for reproductive choice and reproductive justice.
Thank you so very much for that. What can communities of faith do to embrace reproductive rights, and why should they do that?
Communities of faith need to acknowledge that people have to make difficult choices in life. Life is not all black and white and cut and dry, as a lot of stories in our sacred writings are. There are difficult choices that people have to make that aren't even addressed in our sacred text. And so the best thing for communities of faith to do is to love their neighbors like they love themselves and support women who have to make difficult decisions concerning their pregnancies. If men were the ones who got pregnant, we wouldn't even be talking about this. Men need to support women, and women need to support one another in making those difficult decisions. All women don't have nice, healthy, smooth pregnancies to term. And that needs to be acknowledged by faith communities who are supposed to be advocates of truth and facts. So faith communities need to just support a woman's right to choose and let that be between a woman doctor and her God.
Thank you so much for that. And we have a shout out for you from a dear friend of mine, Pastor Brandy Slaughter. All of her students in the Imagining Justice class that are part of the Methodist Theological School in Ohio are here. So thank you, Brandy, for bringing your students. And Dr. Brown, you got a fan club.
Hi, Brandy.
We miss you, Brandy. So let's go ahead and jump in on some questions. We've got a few. We don't have the chat working. Everything's being posted through Q&A. So you can go ahead and find that at the bottom of the screen here. Let's go ahead and start with one about, this is, I think, an interesting one. Should this reproductive choice also, should we be thinking about young people, young medical students who may devote their profession to women's medicine, and how one mishap could land them in jail or scrutiny because of the way our laws are? Do you want to jump in and talk about that, Dr. Norris, please?
Thanks. It's a really important question. You know, Ohio prides itself on having an amazing medical apparatus across the state. The different hospitals in our major cities are world class. And you are right, the question asker is right, that there are, it becomes very challenging for healthcare providers to do their jobs. It already was. I mean, we're talking now about access to abortion as the laws are really changing dynamically in our state, but it's been a state where there have been a lot of laws and confusing kinds of legislation for a decade. And healthcare providers who we interviewed were people like genetic counselors who take care of pregnant people who might need to terminate a pregnancy. And it was really unclear to those healthcare providers what they were allowed to do and say and what their patients were allowed to access. And that's become even more challenging when a healthcare provider is trained to provide care. The patient in front of them wants and needs the care, and the healthcare provider has to say, I cannot treat you in the way that you're asking for. It actually causes moral distress among healthcare providers to be unable to provide care that they know how to provide and that the patient needs. This moral distress is compounded by a very real fear that people could have a felony if they make a wrong call in a clinical case. Those fears compromise care all the time. And I think Joan put it so beautifully that there are things where we need government to legislate and control, and there are spaces where people are able to make those choices on their own. People are able to make choices about whether to continue a pregnancy on their own, and healthcare providers are able to provide care that they're trained to provide on their own. And so I think the chill effect on healthcare providers who are already here is real. And I think we'll continue to see that chill in medical students who will choose to study elsewhere, residents who will leave the state once they have their training. And it'll be a threat across the board, not just in reproductive healthcare provision, but in all kinds of healthcare provision.
Thank you for that. We got a long statement question from Julie Erickson. I'm going to tease it out a couple different ways. The first is, can we just once again talk about how Well, first off, the question is, why is there not an emphasis on preventing contraception? I think there is quite an emphasis on preventing contraception, but I would love anyone to kind of jump in and discuss how you see that playing out. Are there enough conversations about preventing contraception? That would be question one. Question two, should we be concerned that access to contraceptives could also be at risk now that the Dodd's ruling has gone the way it has?
Well, I certainly think that she's right, that there should be an emphasis on prevention. It certainly would be better than having to consider an abortion, but it's not the whole solution. But absolutely, that's what Planned Parenthood does, and does so well. And yet people object to that too. They, think all of that is something that shouldn't be done. I remember when I found out my daughter at age 14 went to Planned Parenthood. I was sort of shocked, tell the truth, but I was glad she knew enough to do it. Anyway, it's a good argument that you should have contraception, but it's not an argument for not allowing the woman to choose an abortion if she feels she needs to, or if the fetus is in bad shape, or any one of a number of reasons. It can be very detrimental to her health. It shouldn't be either or. We should have freedom to do both, to plan and then to take care of the pregnancy with an abortion if we must.
Thank you so much. You know what, Joan? This kind of gives me a chill. Dan Zavon says government should not be involved. A government that can prohibit abortion is a government that could require abortion.
Right.
Never thought of it that way. It gives me chills. Anyone else want to talk about access to contraception?
Yes. I want to talk about the fact that contraception does not work for every woman. And so then what does she do?
Yes, thank you for that. Let's go to another part of her statement was about race. How are issues around pregnancy, childbirth, contraception, abortion, how might that be, how might we look at that in an intersectional way in the experiences of various people of color, transgender folks? Suparna, do you want to jump in on this one?
I mean, this again goes back to, also going back to the conversation about contraception, taking it further to comprehensive quality sex education, which is also something that there's a lot of pressures to prohibit that information. So not only is it knowledge, but it's also providing information about what resources that could be possible. But this is overall a even bigger question about sexual autonomy and sexual rights. And so having kind of autonomy over one's body, what one does, it's reproduction and reproductive rights, forced birth, or forcing not to have kids, all of that comes under the larger kind of rubric of what I see of sexual rights and sexual autonomy. And in terms of like access, the lack of the affordability is one issue that would cut across. If you are lower resourced, a lot of contraceptives, for instance, are sometimes either unsafe or they can be unaffordable. So that's something to think about. When we're thinking about overall and across gender identity, again, that is, it's about reproduction, but it's also about overall control of one's sexuality, control over one's decision-making, who's making decisions for you and about your life.
Dr. Norris? you want to talk about your perspective from a public health perspective? How might we be considering the experiences of diverse women and people?
We talked already about the idea that economic factors are one of the main reasons that people give for having an abortion. And as Suparna has described, economic factors are an important reason that people, it's important in the barriers to having sex education and having access to contraception. And so the structures that create and recreate poverty and anti-Black racism are the very same structures that can drive the need for abortion and then can drive the inaccessibility of abortion. So lack of time, lack of money, lack of other resources to obtain either contraception or abortion are part of the same structures that limit people's ability to live their best life. And the way that I think we can think about leaning into it from a public health perspective is to think about what kinds of access people need and want, and to build in this and build out the structures that allow people to have that access, to understand what the barriers are and work to reduce them, rather than to somehow kind of play a blame game that somebody should have done something different and been responsible in a different way, and instead provide people with the resources and the access that they need to live the life of their choice.
Thank you so much. So I think this question from my friend Valerie in Dayton is actually a really good one as we wrap up. This is just the beginning of a conversation, I think. But, Justice Thomas signaled that this decision could be considered just the tip of the iceberg, and more precedents could be overturned. So what should each of us do now?
Well, it's a good question, and it's very hard to know, and that's frustrating. But I've never been a one-issue person. I always thought that was a mistake until now. And now I think we've got to get out and vote and get others to vote for responsible, reasonable candidates of either party. Party should be beside the point at this point. We want candidates who support a woman's right to make her own reproductive choices. And that's one thing we can do, not just vote ourselves, but get others to get out and vote. Don't let them, the other thing, they should really pay attention to some of the redistricting decisions, because gerrymandered districts can produce a legislative district where the legislator is perfectly safe no matter how many bad things he does. He'll get reelected because of the way district lines are drawn. So that's another thing we can do, is pay a little attention. And that's such a complicated subject, I hesitate to recommend it to anybody, but at least on the surface, have some idea of what's going on. And we're using a legislative map right now for the November election that's still being challenged, right, Jen?
Yes, absolutely. We are still challenging the districts. So we need everyone to vote now. The short term is vote in this election coming up, and know that we are still working to bring more fair districts to the people of Ohio. And just to be clear, the League of Women Voters does promote access to birth control. We do promote all those kinds of ways of preventing pregnancy, as well as this, we support reproductive choice. And Joan knows very well that this was decided by our members. This was thoroughly studied and decided by our members. Do you want to say one thing about that, Joan? And then I'm going to have our other three panelists say a final word.
No, you said it properly. And we are a nonpartisan organization. We're not doing anything because it's either Republican or Democrat. doing it because it's the right thing. And we've studied it, and that was our conclusion, and we're proud of it. And I just wish we could do more. Maybe one of us could get on the Supreme Court.
Let's do that. Dr. Brown, I think we were going to do this in different order, but I'm just going to ask you, as a person of faith, you know, we often hear, and I have certainly many friends of faith who are pro-choice and pro-contraception and family planning and all those things. How do you bring other members of faith along with you?
All you can do is continue to have the conversations and continue to help folk think beyond themselves and their own personal experiences. I repeat, people have to make difficult choices in various situations, and we, as people of faith, need to also understand that God is with and helps folks make those difficult choices. And they make those choices to the best of their ability. And just because I disagree with what decision they may have made doesn't mean it was not the best decision for them. And so we just have to keep talking and keep dialoguing about these issues and bringing up everything, bringing up the contraceptive stuff, the fact some contraceptives don't work in some women, ectopic pregnancies, all of those, complications and things like that. People talk about the life of the mother. Well, the life of the mother is in potential jeopardy the moment conception happens. Conception can happen. The embryo can implant itself on the fallopian tube instead of the uterine wall. And so the life of the mother right then and there is in jeopardy. And so there's potential jeopardy for a pregnant woman from conception through birth. And everybody needs to understand that, and then therefore, it is up to the woman and her doctor and her God to decide how to handle those complications. And if abortion is the best solution, the abortion needs to happen, and the faith community needs to say, we still support what the decision had be, because that is the way that the mother was able to preserve her health and life.
Thank you so much for that. Dr. Norris, I know you probably have some final words. One thing that we didn't get to is the mental health of not having a full range of options at your disposal. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about that and then go into your final comments.
I wanted to take off from where Dr. Brown was speaking about what people can do in their own lives to we have a quiet crisis in Ohio, right? I mean, people don't necessarily talk very much about abortion until now. It's now more in the public, but as many as 20,000 people have an abortion in Ohio in a typical year. All of us know people who know and love people who have abortions, and yet stigma really keeps the topic in the shadows. And so a thing that every single one of us can do is just to normalize the conversation, talk about abortion with our friends and our families, and allow it in a compassionate way that really acknowledges the humanity of other people who are choosing abortion and ourselves when we choose abortion. And I think that Ohioans actually are pretty far along this path. We did a survey of reproductive aged women in Ohio, and 83% of reproductive age women in Ohio are either supportive of abortion or do not oppose abortion. So a vast majority of people who can be pregnant in Ohio understands that abortion is a nuanced issue. So we're not remote from this reality that I'm advocating for in terms of how people already think and believe. So the next step is for not just reproductive age women, but people who can't become pregnant, either because they're older or because they're male, to also take part in this conversation. It's a real conversation about humanity. And so a final plug about data. The research group that I lead it has Twitter that's very active at Open Repro Health. So if people want to learn more about reproductive health and I would also advocate people to follow a group called Answer, which is Advancing New Standards in Reproductive Health, which also has tremendous research on these questions about mental health care. And the very short answer is that people who are able to have an abortion when they want one do better than people who are denied an abortion. And some of those are short-term and some of those are long-term consequences.
Thank you for that. Dr. Bhaskaran, your final thoughts for our audience?
I would say that many others on our panel of speakers have identified multiple approaches. So one was vote, use the legislative route. The point about gerrymandering is complicated and key. For instance, I've come across these maps where the Guttmacher Institute has shown that states, gerrymandering is linked, the kind of connection between states that have total bans or really regressive abortion bans, highly gerrymandered, and that elected often in those states are more answerable to a small minority. And the point that Alison, you brought up, that the survey that you did, that 83% of women that were surveyed were very sympathetic in terms of having rights and so on. So it shows this kind of lopsidedness of where things are at, where the majority or the bulk of people and women really want access, want rights. But ultimately, what all of us have kind of pointed out is that there's no one silver kind of bullet, that one needs to approach it in multiple ways simultaneously, whether it's having conversations with neighbors and family members, whether it's about removing the stigma and normalizing the conversation, whether it's a legislative approach. The other thing I also wanted to point out is that there are ongoing fundraisers for abortion care funds. There are fundraisers that many community organizations that are holding to support those individuals and women who have a hard time accessing resources. So it's multi-pronged, the approach, given the kind of enormity of the issue.
Thank you so much for that. We had a question about a recent court win by our friends at Planned Parenthood and ACLU. So our lawyers at ACLU, who represent us in voting rights cases and in gerrymandering cases, also litigated against Ohio's heartbeat bill, or heartbeat ban, which is when it's not really a heartbeat, but when there's electrical activity at about 6 weeks, women can no longer obtain, or people can no longer obtain an abortion here in Ohio. There is a court down in Hamilton County that has granted a temporary restraining order, a TRO. And so what that means is, at least for a little bit of time, the next 14 days, women will be able to access that right of abortion, and hopefully that will continue onward. Our friends at ACLU and Planned Parenthood are going to continue to argue that the right to abortion is protected in the Ohio Constitution. And so if you want more information about that, none of us are lawyers here, but ACLU does have a lot of information on their website about that. I'm just so grateful to each and every one of you for attending and listening. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but I do think we made the point that abortion is not just a political issue, that it is a issue of faith, where we can accept and love each other and what each individual family needs, that it's an issue of economics, that it can affect our entire economy, as well as the economy of various households, that it is an issue of health and healthcare, and that it can have profound impacts on our entire community. And finally, Joan Lawrence, that people, not just of all faiths, but of all parties, support the right to choose. And so we will continue our work in this area. Just to remind everyone to never let your stance on an issue mean that you are partisan, because issues cannot be partisan. Correct, Joan? Candidates are partisan, parties are partisan, but public policy itself is not partisan. And with that, you have one more, you want to, anything else to say, Joan?
No, you're absolutely right. It is not a partisan issue.
Thank you. And we're going to pull these slides up one more time. Thank you. I really wish we could hang out all day and all night. But I promise, just like we really fell in love with Dr. Bhaskaran and had her back, we're going to have all these other speakers back as well. Just a reminder that we have our State House Day on December 7th. We hope you'll come. We would love to have you be a member. The members are the engine of this great organization that's over 100 years old. Make sure you vote, and make sure you check on everyone else that they have a voting plan. First off, make sure folks know that there's the voter registration deadline is October 11th. Can't tell you how much it hurts my heart when we end up having individuals who miss that deadline. We have all kinds of stuff on YouTube. I think this one will probably go on YouTube, so you can find us there. And we need election protection volunteers. And even if you can't volunteer, if you can make sure to follow us on social media and then share our information on how people can get help if they're having questions or problems accessing their ballot. Be a poll worker, get others to be poll workers, especially those young people. And of course, please, if you can, please donate to the League of Women Voters of Ohio. Iris, would you like to say a final word? Oh, you're muted.
I guess my final word would be to thank all of our panelists. It's been, I think, eye-opening as well as encouraging from my point of view. And of course, to also thank everybody who was on this call and made use of the wonderful panelists and the information this evening. So thank you all.
Thank you. And this was a labor of love by Sherry Rose and Nazik Papasha and many others. So thanks to the entire LWVO team, and we will see you soon.